The wedding hall fell silent. The millionaire bride, Isabella Sterling, with a cruel smile, pointed to the pregnant maid in the corner of the room. "For our next song," she announced to hundreds of guests, "my maid Lena will be giving us a special performance." Her face pale with dread, Lena was forced onto the stage. What she didn't know was that her public humiliation was about to become her boss's ruin and the beginning of her greatest dream. "Just because you work here doesn't mean I have to look at you," Isabella said, her voice as cold as the marble floors she walked upon. She glided past Lena Petrova in the hallway of the sprawling Bel Air mansion. "Try to stay out of my sight today." At 6 months pregnant, she found it harder each day to make herself invisible. "Yes, Miss Sterling," she said quietly. As Isabella's sharp footsteps faded down the corridor, Lena took a deep breath and continued pushing her cleaning cart. The morning sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, highlighting the dancing dust particles in the air, particles she would need to eliminate before Isabella returned. At 28 years old, Lena had never planned to be a live-in maid. Her dreams had once centered around the vibrant music scene of Austin, not scrubbing toilets in a Los Angeles palace. But life had other plans when Leo Vance, a smooth-talking musician she'd dated briefly, disappeared the day after she told him she was pregnant with his child. "Lena, there you are," called a friendly voice from behind her. Marco Rossi, the head chef, walked toward her with a warm smile. His white uniform was spotless, a stark contrast to Lena's worn-out apron. "I made extra breakfast." "You need to eat more," he said, handing her a plate with toast, eggs, and fruit. "Thank you, Marco. You didn't have to do that. You're eating for two now," he said, nodding toward her belly. "How are you feeling today?" "But fine. Just 2 more days until the wedding, then things might calm down. Maybe. Or maybe the new Mrs. Croft will be even more demanding." They both knew this was likely true. Julian Croft, their 40-year-old employer and tech millionaire, was marrying Isabella Sterling, a former model from a prominent Boston family. While Julian treated the staff with a quiet, distant respect, Isabella viewed them as furniture that occasionally moved. "I better finish the East Wing before she comes back," Lena said, taking a quick bite of toast. "Take care of yourself," Marco called as she walked away. "That baby needs a strong mama." As she cleaned the 3rd guest bathroom, she heard Isabella's sharp voice from a nearby room. "No, Clara," she said. "I wanted ivory roses in that room, not cream." "Are you trying to ruin everything?" "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling. The florist must have... Fix it. This wedding cost $3 million. It needs to be perfect." After finishing the bathroom, she moved to the hallway. As she bent down to pick up a fallen towel, a sharp pain shot through her back. She straightened slowly, placing one hand on the wall for support. "Are you okay?" The deep male voice startled her. Julian Croft stood a few feet away, his expression genuinely concerned. Unlike Isabella, Julian always noticed when someone was struggling. "Yes, Mr. Croft, just a little back pain. Nothing to worry about." Lena found a rare moment of quiet in the library, a sanctuary of dark wood and hushed silence amidst the storm. The scent of old paper and lemon polish was a welcome relief from the cloying perfume of the endless rose arrangements. She was carefully polishing the vast collection of leather-bound books, her movements slow and deliberate to ease the persistent ache in her lower back. For a few precious minutes, the only sounds were the soft whisper of her cloth and the distant muffled shouts from the landscapers outside. It was then that Eleanor Croft, Julian's mother, arrived. She moved through the library doorway with a natural grace, her presence seeming to calm the very air. A woman in her late 60s, she possessed a quiet elegance that had nothing to do with Isabella's ostentatious designer labels. Her smile when she saw Lena was genuine and warm, a stark contrast to the perpetual sneer Lena had grown accustomed to. "What a peaceful spot you found," Eleanor said, her voice as soft as the worn leather spines. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Croft," Lena said, instinctively starting to stand straighter, a gesture of respect that sent a fresh twinge through her spine. Eleanor's keen eyes missed nothing. She noticed the slight wince, the way Lena's hand went to the small of her back. "Oh, my dear, please don't get up on my account," she insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. She gestured to the rolling library ladder. In fact, why don't you sit for a moment? You look exhausted. She blinked them away quickly and lowered herself onto the ladder's bottom step. Thank you. It's just a lot of bending lately. How far along are you now? She wasn't the pregnant maid in this moment. She was just Lena. A beautiful time, though I know it doesn't always feel that way, Eleanor replied, a nostalgic smile touching her lips. The promise of new life is the greatest magic there is. Is everything progressing well? Do you have everything you need? She found herself speaking more than she intended, about her backaches, her excitement, her fears about being a single mother. Eleanor listened intently, nodding, offering a word of encouragement here and there. She spoke to Lena not as a servant, but as a person, a young woman on the cusp of motherhood, and the normality of it was a balm to Lena's soul. The moment was shattered by the sharp click of heels on the parquet floor. Isabella swept into the room, a vision of impatient perfection in a cream-colored silk dress. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing the books, the furniture, even her future mother-in-law, before landing on Lena with laser-focused disdain. The scene, Eleanor Croft chatting comfortably with the help, was clearly an offense to her sensibilities. "Mother Croft, you're early," Isabella said, her tone dripping with a saccharine condescension that failed to mask her irritation. She didn't wait for a response before turning her frosty gaze on Lena. "And you, shouldn't you be working? There are champagne flutes that need polishing in the ballroom. I can see fingerprints from here." "Isabella, I insisted she take a rest. The poor girl is on her feet all day and she's expecting. A moment's respite is hardly a capital offense." Eleanor's tone was pleasant, but her eyes held a steady challenge. "We were just having a lovely chat about the baby." The subtle animosity between the two women thickened the air, a silent battle fought over a library ladder. Lena felt it keenly, a tension that was about more than just her. It was a clash of worlds, of values. "How charitable of you," Isabella said, the words like shards of glass. "But sentimentality doesn't polish glassware. The ballroom. Now." The last word was a whip crack of command, devoid of any pretense of courtesy. Lena nodded, pushing herself up. "Yes, Miss Sterling." That small act of kindness was a lifeline thrown to her in a sea of dismissiveness, a tangible reminder that not everyone in this opulent, cold world had a heart of stone. It was a spark of light, and though it was quickly smothered by Isabella's darkness, it continued to glow faintly within her, a fragile ember of hope she would cling to in the difficult days to come. She left the library feeling for the first time in months just a little bit seen. Lena closed the heavy oak door behind her, and the cacophony of the wedding preparations, the shouts of florists, the whine of a power screwdriver assembling a dance floor, Isabella's incessant sharp demands faded into a distant hum. Here the air was still and carried the comforting scent of old paper, lemon polish, and rich mahogany. Sunlight streamed through a single large window, illuminating dancing dust motes that she was, for once, in no hurry to banish. She ran her dust cloth along the spines of countless leather-bound books, her movements slow and methodical. The title spoke of economics, philosophy, and history, a library that felt both impressive and lonely. This was Julian's private refuge, and it felt like a violation to be there, even with a dusting rag in hand. Her lower back ached with a persistent dull throb, a constant companion in her 6th month. She paused, leaning against the solid desk for a moment's respite, her hand instinctively cradling the curve of her belly. In the profound quiet, a memory surfaced, unbidden and painful. It was the song that had come to her in the raw, hollowed-out days after Leo had vanished, a melody born from a fracture in her soul. It started as a hum, a low, mournful vibration in her chest, a private lament for a future that had crumbled to dust. Almost without realizing it, the hum found words, her voice a soft, hesitant whisper in the silent room. Broken glass on a midnight floor, pieces of what came before. But every shard still catches the light, a tiny star in the endless night. It was her secret anthem of survival. Lost in the catharsis of the music, her voice grew stronger, losing its self-consciousness. She closed her eyes, no longer a maid in a millionaire's study, but a woman giving voice to her pain and her hope. For 2 precious minutes she was free. She did not hear the door open. She did not see Julian Croft pause on the threshold, his hand still on the brass knob, his breath caught in his throat. He had come to retrieve a book, expecting an empty room. Instead, he found a scene that rooted him to the spot. Lena, her face tilted toward the sunbeam, her features softened by a sorrowful serenity he had never seen, her voice weaving a spell of raw, unvarnished beauty that seemed to make the very air vibrate. When the last note faded into the quiet, she opened her eyes and saw him. Her breath hitched, the spell shattered. Color flooded her cheeks, a deep, mortified crimson. She fumbled with the dusting cloth, nearly knocking over a small jade figurine on the desk. "Mr. Croft, I'm so sorry. I didn't know anyone was—" She stammered, her voice now small and tight, a stark contrast to the soaring instrument of moments before. Julian took a step into the room, his expression one of pure, unadulterated awe. "Please," he said, his voice unusually gentle, almost reverent. "Don't stop. Don't ever apologize for that." He shook his head slowly, a faint, amazed smile touching his lips. "Lena, that was incredible. I had no idea. A talent like that, it's a crime to keep it hidden away." He was looking at her not as staff, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person, an artist. It was a look she hadn't received since her days in Austin, and it was both intoxicating and dangerous. Unseen in the shadowed hallway, another pair of eyes witnessed the exchange. Isabella had been looking for Julian, a question about the seating chart on her lips. She now stood frozen, her manicured fingers gripping the doorframe. She saw the way her fiancé was looking at the maid, not with pity or detached kindness, but with captivated wonder. It was a look of genuine, profound admiration, one he had never once given her despite her calculated efforts. A cold, sharp needle of jealousy pierced through her. This insignificant pregnant girl in a cheap uniform had just commanded a level of Julian's attention that Isabella, with all her beauty and breeding, struggled to secure. Her perfectly composed features tightened into a cold, hard mask. The tender, private melody, the unguarded moment of connection, it wasn't touching. It was an affront, a threat. And in that instant, a venomous idea, perfect in its cruelty, began to crystallize in her mind. That simple, beautiful song would not remain a private secret. She would make sure of it. She would turn Lena's vulnerability into a weapon and her talent into a joke. The overture was over. Isabella would now compose the main performance. She moved among the tables, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, her simple black uniform a stark, somber note in the vibrant, opulent composition of the Brentwood Country Club. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and seared scallops, a world so far removed from her own it felt like a film set. Her back ached with a familiar, persistent thrum, a constant reminder of the life growing within her and the physical toll of serving the spectacle of someone else's happiness. It was while she was collecting empty champagne flutes from a table near the kitchen's swinging doors that she first caught the frantic whisper. Clara Martinez, the wedding planner, was huddled with one of her assistants, her face ashen, and completely lost her voice. "The doctor said absolute vocal rest." "There's no way," the assistant was saying, her words tumbling out in a panicked rush. Clara pressed her fingers to her temples. "This can't be happening. Not the night before. Who do we even call?" She stood near the entrance, ensuring her performance had an audience. "My wedding is ruined. Completely ruined," she lamented to a small, sympathetic circle of her bridesmaids. First the peonies were the wrong shade, and now this. A singer with no voice? It's a sign of absolute catastrophe. She dabbed at non-existent tears beneath her eyes, careful not to smudge her impeccable makeup. It was then that Eleanor Croft, her expression one of genuine concern, gently touched Isabella's arm. "My dear, please don't upset yourself. These things have a way of working out." She offered a warm, reassuring smile. "You know, your maid Lena has a lovely singing voice. I heard her in the garden the other day. It was truly beautiful." Her performative despair evaporated instantaneously, replaced by a chilling, predatory stillness. Her eyes, which had been darting around in feigned distress, focused on a distant point, a slow, calculating smile spreading across her perfectly painted lips. It was not a smile of relief or gratitude, but one of pure, wicked inspiration. She looked like a chess player who had just seen a path to checkmate she hadn't noticed before. The expression was so starkly malevolent that a cold shiver, sharp as an icicle, traced its way down Lena's spine, making her hands tremble around the tray of dirty glasses she held. "Is that so?" Isabella said, her voice now a purr of newfound interest. She didn't even glance in Lena's direction, her gaze still fixed on her brilliant, cruel idea. How interesting. She busied herself with her work, avoiding Isabella's line of sight, but she felt the woman's presence like a gathering storm. Later, as Lena was carrying a heavy tray of dessert plates back to the kitchen, she saw Isabella again. This time, she was tucked into a quiet alcove near the club's grand fireplace, her phone pressed to her ear. Her body was turned away from the party, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur, meant for one set of ears only. Lena slowed her steps, the clamor of the dinner fading into a dull roar as she strained to listen. No, don't bother calling anyone else," Isabella was saying, a thread of cruel amusement weaving through her words. "Don't worry about the singer at all. I've just come up with the perfect solution." She paused, and Lena could almost see the smirk on her face. "It will be a performance no one will ever forget. Trust me." She didn't need to hear another word. The sinking feeling in her stomach solidified into a hard, cold knot of certainty. The perfect solution, the performance no one would forget. It wasn't just about finding a replacement. It was a plan. And Lena knew, with a dread that seeped into her very bones, that the plan, in all its horrifying detail, somehow involved her. The usual glacial chill was gone, replaced by a saccharine warmth that was far more alarming. She was smiling, a perfect practiced curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Lena, darling," she began, her voice a silken purr, "I have the most terrible problem." Isabella never used endearments. "The singer for our first dance," Isabella continued, placing a dramatic hand over her heart, her voice dripping with a despair Lena knew was counterfeit. "She's come down with a dreadful case of laryngitis. Completely ruined her voice. The wedding is tomorrow, and it's a complete disaster." She let out a theatrical sigh. "And then I remembered. Eleanor mentioned, just in passing of course, that you have a lovely singing voice. She heard you in the garden." Lena kept her expression neutral, though her heart began to hammer against her ribs. "And I had the most wonderful idea," Isabella pressed on, her tone shifting to one of conspiratorial excitement. "It would mean the Julian if you would sing for our first dance. After all he's done, offering you employment during your delicate situation." Her gaze flicked down to Lena's rounded belly, the glance both pointed and dismissive. "It would be such a beautiful way to show your gratitude. A private, personal thank you from all of us, really." She framed it not as a command, but as an honor. She weaponized Julian's inherent decency and Lena's precarious position, making refusal seem like the height of ingratitude. The trap was baited with faux kindness and social obligation. Lena's instincts screamed in protest. Every fiber of her being told her to refuse, to run. But the weight of her circumstances pressed down on her. This woman held her job, her roof, her stability in her perfectly manicured hands. To say no was to risk everything. I'm not a professional," Lena stammered, her voice weak. "Oh, nonsense," Isabella waved a dismissive hand. "It will be perfectly intimate. Just a simple song. We'll consider you the backup, my dear, just in case our poor singer hasn't recovered. It would set my mind so at ease to know we have a plan." She leaned in closer, the cloying scent of her perfume enveloping Lena. "Please." For Julian, trapped, outmaneuvered and feeling utterly cornered, Lena felt the words leave her mouth before she could stop them. "All right. As a backup. Marvelous. I'll have the band leader give you the sheet music." "Thank you, Lena. You're a lifesaver." And with that she glided out of the kitchen, leaving a wake of unease. The encounter left Lena feeling nauseated. She spent the next few hours trying to convince herself it was just a harmless, if bizarre, request. Perhaps she was being paranoid. Perhaps Isabella was genuinely in a bind. Her fragile self-assurance was shattered twice that afternoon. First it was Marco. He found her taking a momentary break in the pantry, sipping a glass of water. His kind face was etched with concern. "I saw the Ice Queen leaving the kitchen earlier looking far too pleased with herself," he said, his voice low. "What did she want?" Marco's expression darkened instantly. "No, absolutely not, Lena. You cannot do it." He gripped her shoulder, his touch firm and grounding. "I have worked in houses like this for 20 years. Women like Isabella Sterling do not ask for favors. They set traps. She doesn't want you to sing. She wants you to fail, publicly. Be careful. She's weaving a web and you are the fly." Later, as she was arranging floral centerpieces in the grand hall, another voice stopped her. "Lena, a quick word." He was a handsome, relaxed man who had always treated the staff with an easy-going respect. Today, however, his usual smile was absent. "I overheard Isabella talking to the wedding planner," he said, steering her into a quiet alcove. He looked uncomfortable, as if betraying a confidence. "Look, I don't know what she's asked of you, and I probably shouldn't be saying this, but just be wary. Izzy has a particular sense of humor. It often comes at someone else's expense. Especially anyone Julian shows even a flicker of kindness towards." He gave her a meaningful look. "If she's offered you a spotlight, it's only so the fall is harder. I've seen it before." It wasn't paranoia. It was a conspiracy. Lena felt the walls of the beautiful mansion closing in on her, the gilded hallways now feeling like a labyrinth designed for her humiliation. Isabella wasn't just preparing for a wedding, she was preparing a stage for an execution, and Lena had just been cast as the star victim. Lena was on her feet from dawn, the promise of overtime pay for her baby's crib, the only fuel pushing her through the persistent grinding ache in her lower back. Every time she bent to pick up a stray petal or straighten a chair sash, a sharp twinge reminded her of her vulnerability. In a rare, stolen moment of quiet, she hid in a secluded corner of the massive kitchen, folding a mountain of linen napkins into precise swans. The sharp scent of starched cotton was a small respite from the overwhelming perfume of thousands of blooms. It was here that Julian found her. He looked exhausted, the crisp lines of his tuxedo seeming to weigh him down. His eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, were dull, lacking any trace of a groom's joyful sparkle. He looked less like a man embarking on a new life, and more like one heading to his own sentencing. "Lena," he said, his voice soft, "are you sure you should be working this hard?" The concern in his tone was genuine, a stark and unsettling contrast to the day's prevailing mood. "Please, don't overdo it. I can have someone else take over. I'm fine, Mr. Croft." "Really? Just finishing up," she lied, forcing a small smile. He studied her for a moment longer, a faint line of worry creasing his brow, before giving a curt nod and retreating. His quiet empathy was a solitary beacon, making the morning's other interactions feel even more brutal. Not 30 minutes later, while replenishing water glasses in the grand hall, Lena witnessed the counterpoint to Julian's decency. Isabella, a vision of terrifying beauty in a white silk robe, was holding court. A young junior florist, her hands trembling, held a bouquet of exquisite peonies. "No, you stupid girl!" Isabella's voice was a venomous whip crack, slicing through the murmur of preparations. "I said blush peonies, not shell pink. Are you colorblind? Or just incompetent? The vendor said this was the shade you approved. I know what I wanted, and this is wrong." Isabella snatched the bouquet and threw it to the floor, the delicate petals scattering like confetti at a funeral. "Fix it, now, or I will ensure you never work another event in this city again." Isabella smoothed her robe, her expression one of pristine irritation, as if swatting a gnat. She then glided away, leaving the wreckage of the flowers and the young woman's confidence in her wake. Lena stood frozen, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. The juxtaposition was nauseating, Julian's whispered concern in the kitchen and Isabella's public evisceration in the hall. It was a perfect, horrible diorama of the marriage itself. She couldn't shake the feeling that Julian, a good man, seemingly sleepwalking through his own life, was willingly walking into a gilded cage, and she, the invisible maid, was an unwilling participant in the day's cruel theatrics. The warnings from Marco and Daniel echoed in her mind, transforming the opulent ballroom into a coliseum, the floral arrangements into props for her impending slaughter. Her backache intensified, a throbbing reminder of her precarious position. Every time she passed Isabella, she felt the bride's gaze like a physical touch, cold and assessing. It wasn't the dismissive disregard Lena was used to. It was anticipatory. Isabella was watching her, a predator counting down the hours until the hunt. During the ceremony, Lena was tasked with ensuring a side door remained unobstructed. From her shadowed perch, she watched Julian stand at the altar. His posture was rigid, his responses automatic. When he lifted Isabella's veil, his smile was a brief professional flicker that never reached his eyes. He looked past his radiant bride, his gaze drifting over the crowd as if searching for an exit that wasn't there. Lena's heart ached for him. He was marrying a stranger, a beautifully packaged illusion who had just hours ago reveled in crushing a young girl's spirit. As the guests erupted in applause, Isabella turned, her eyes scanning the periphery until they locked directly onto Lena. And there it was, not a smile but a slow, deliberate curl of her lips. A promise. The trap was set. The execution was merely waiting for its cue. The applause for the new couple felt to Lena like the beating of drums, heralding not a celebration but a sacrifice. The band leader, a man with a perfectly waxed mustache, stepped to the microphone. "And now the moment we've all been waiting for," he announced with practiced cheer. "The first dance for our beautiful new couple, Mr. and Mrs. Julian Croft." It was the cue. As if on a hidden director's signal, Isabella's perfectly composed face dissolved into a mask of theatrical panic. She rushed to the band leader, clutching his arm, her whisper a frantic, urgent hiss that was just loud enough for those at the nearest tables to hear. His eyebrows shot up in surprise, then concern. He nodded vigorously. Isabella then moved with purpose, her silk gown whispering against the floor as she cut through the crowd toward the kitchen's swinging doors. She burst into the steamy, organized chaos where Lena was wrist-deep in soapy water, clearing a towering stack of dessert plates. "Lena, thank God!" Isabella's voice was a breathless, desperate plea. She pressed a hand to her chest, the very picture of a distressed bride. Every head in the kitchen turned. The sous chef paused, his knife hovering over a bundle of herbs. A server froze, a tray of empty champagne flutes in her hands. Lena looked up, her heart immediately beginning a frantic drum against her ribs. "Miss Sterling, is everything all right?" "The singer, he doesn't know our song. Our first dance song. Julian will be devastated." Isabella's eyes were wide, shimmering with manufactured tears. She thrust a neatly folded sheet of paper into Lena's wet, soapy hand. "You have to help. You're the only one who can do this. Please." The title of the song made her blood run cold. It was L'amour éphémère, a notoriously difficult French ballad known for its octave-leaping vocal runs and its fragile, breathy high C. It was a song designed to showcase a virtuoso, a song meant to make even seasoned professionals break into a cold sweat. To ask a pregnant maid, who hadn't sung professionally in years, to perform it cold, without rehearsal, was absurd. It was impossible. Marco, from his station at the stove, caught Lena's eye. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of his head, his expression screaming a silent, desperate warning. "Don't. It's a trap. This song, it's too—" She framed it as the ultimate act of loyalty, a chance to repay the kindness of the man who owned the roof over her head. The manipulation was brilliant and cruel. It would mean the world to him. "It's our song. You'd be saving our first dance." Her refusal died in her throat. Before she could form another word, the kitchen doors swung open again. Clara Martinez, the wedding planner, stood there. Her face was pale, her expression a complex map of apology and resigned duty. She didn't meet Lena's eyes. "Isabella said you're needed in the ballroom." "Immediately," Clara said, her voice flat. "But I haven't agreed," Lena started. "There's no time," Isabella interjected, physically turning Lena by her shoulders and pushing her gently toward Clara. "Go, be a darling." She guided the stunned woman out of the kitchen, the swinging doors flapping shut behind them, cutting off the sight of Marco's horrified face. The roar of the party hit them first, then the blinding glare of the crystal chandeliers. They weaved through tables of curious guests, a surreal procession. The impeccably dressed planner and the pregnant maid in her stained apron, clutching a sheet of music like a condemned man's last letter. As they neared the edge of the dance floor, the crowd parting before them, Lena's eyes scanned the room. They landed on the bridal party's table, and there it was. Isabella had slipped back into her place beside Julian, but she was looking directly at Lena. Her mask of panic was gone. In its place was a slow, triumphant smirk. She didn't bother to hide it. She caught the eye of her head bridesmaid, a woman with a razor-sharp bob, and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The smirk was a sledgehammer. It shattered the last of Lena's confusion, the last vestige of doubt. The singer's sudden incompetence, the impossibly difficult song, Clara's timely appearance, the staged panic. It was all a meticulously crafted lie. This was no emergency. It was a meticulously planned execution. She was being led to the gallows, and the audience was waiting for the trapdoor to swing open. The music stand stood empty before the microphone, a stark reminder that there would be no sheet music, no help, no mercy. She was utterly alone. The cruel snickers from the bridal party table were a sharp, percussive counterpoint to the general murmur of confusion that swept through the ballroom. Lena stood frozen in the blinding spotlight, a specimen pinned for examination. Her black uniform, stained with the day's labor, felt like a convict's jumpsuit. 100 pairs of eyes, glittering with diamonds and judgment, dissected her. She could feel the heat of their gazes on her rounded belly, a spectacle within a spectacle. The bandleader, a man with a kind, weary face, met her terrified eyes and gave a helpless shrug, holding up empty hands to confirm the absence of sheet music. This was the final piece of Isabella's perfect trap. Total abandonment. Humiliation, hot and acidic, rose in her throat. Her knees trembled, threatening to buckle under the weight of their collective scorn. She was a joke, a punchline delivered by a vicious bride on her wedding day. Her gaze swept across the sea of smirking, expectant faces. She saw the head bridesmaid, the one with the razor-sharp bob, lean over to whisper something to her neighbor, both of them covering their mouths as they giggled. She saw older socialites fanning themselves, looking bored and mildly offended by the disruption to their evening. They saw a maid, a foolish, pregnant girl who had overstepped. Then her hand moved, almost of its own volition, to rest on the curve of her stomach. Beneath her palm, a tiny foot kicked, a strong, insistent thump against her ribs. It was a jolt of reality, a reminder that she was not alone. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her daughter. What lesson would she be teaching her child if she crumpled now? That they could be used and discarded. That their spirit was something to be broken by the whims of cruel people. No! A spark, small and defiant, ignited in the cold pit of her fear. It grew, fanned by months of silent endurance, of being told to stay out of sight, of Isabella's icy condescension and Julian's quiet, unnoticed kindness. This was her battlefield, and she would not retreat. She would not give Isabella the satisfaction of her tears, her stammering apology, her failure. She turned to the bandleader, her voice a low, steady thread beneath the noise of the crowd. "I'll sing something else," she whispered. His eyes widened in surprise. Just a simple rhythm, a slow 4/4. "Follow me." A simple, sparse drumbeat began, a steady, heartbeat-like rhythm. A bass line joined in, holding down a somber root note. Lena closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the glittering room. She wasn't in a Bel Air mansion anymore. She was back in her tiny Austin apartment, rain streaking the windows, her heart shattered by a man who had vanished, her future a terrifying blank page. The melody had come to her then, a raw, aching thing born from brokenness. She had titled it Shattered Glass, for that's what she felt like. A million scattered pieces, sharp and useless. She stepped up to the microphone, its cold metal a shock against her lips. She took a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to draw in all the pain and fear of the last year. And then she began to sing. Her voice, when it came out, was not the timid, apologetic tone of a servant. It was a low, resonant alto, filled with a gravelly pain that silenced the last of the whispers in the room. The first verse was a confession of despair, of feeling invisible and discarded. You walked right through me like I was made of air, left nothing but the echo of your footsteps on the stair. The smirks had vanished, replaced by expressions of stunned confusion. This wasn't the caterwauling of an arrogant maid they'd been promised. This was something real, something that vibrated with a truth their polished lives rarely touched. Then the chorus began. Lena's voice transformed into something powerful and defiant, filled with a blazing, unstoppable hope. But from the shattered glass, a new light shines, a million fractured pieces. Zhongxin zhuzhuang chengxin de sheji, chong exen zhuzhuang cheng exen de sheji, reassembled into a new design. I'm picking up the fragments, making them my own, building a kingdom from the seeds you've thrown. Every note was a rejection of Isabella's cruelty, a reclamation of her own worth. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of release, of power. She saw Marco at the back of the room, his fists clenched at his sides, his own eyes glistening with proud tears. She saw Clara, the wedding planner, her hand over her mouth, her expression one of dawning horror and awe. And then she saw Julian. He was standing apart from the crowd, near the grand entrance, still as a statue. His program hung forgotten at his side. All the exhaustion, the quiet sadness that had clung to him all day, was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated awe. He was watching her not as his maid, not as a pregnant woman he felt sorry for, but as an artist. He saw the invisible woman finally, fully visible, and she was magnificent. The transformation was so complete, so breathtaking, that he could only stare, his world tilting on its axis as Lena's voice filled the space where his wedding reception was supposed to be, rewriting the story of the entire night. The final note hung in the air, pure and clear, a challenge and a triumph. For a moment, there was absolute, dead silence. And then the room erupted. The sound was a physical force, a wave of awe and respect that washed over the stage. For a few precious seconds, Lena stood bathed in it, her chest heaving, her cheeks wet with the catharsis of her performance. She allowed herself to look out, to truly see the transformed faces, no longer mocking, but mesmerized. It was a feeling more potent than anything she had ever known. The moment shattered as Isabella stormed the stage, a whirlwind of white satin and incandescent rage. Her perfectly composed mask was gone, replaced by a grotesque snarl. She moved with such violent purpose that she nearly ripped the microphone from its cord. The screech of feedback cut through the applause, silencing it instantly. "Wasn't that cute?" Isabella spat into the mic, her voice dripping with a venom so potent it seemed to poison the very air. She didn't look at the audience. Her glare was fixed solely on Lena, reducing her from artist back to object. "A little party trick from the help. Charming. Now get back to the kitchen where you belong." The applause died, replaced by an uncomfortable, shuffling silence. The spell was broken. Humiliation, hot and familiar, flushed through Lena. The invisible maid reappeared, seen once more only as a piece of disobedient furniture. Numbly she nodded, turning to make her escape from the glaring lights, her head bowed. In her haste, her practical, non-slip work shoe, designed for kitchen safety, found the one hazard it couldn't grip. A slick, nearly invisible puddle of champagne spilled during the earlier toast. Her foot shot out from under her. A cry was torn from her lips as she fell hard onto the polished stage floor, her arms instinctively flying around her belly to shield her child. A sharp, searing pain lanced through her side, taking her breath away. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a sound of genuine alarm that replaced the previous tension. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then movement. Julian broke from his stunned paralysis near the entrance. He moved like a man possessed, shoving past gawking guests, his program fluttering forgotten to the floor. Isabella reached for his arm, her voice a shrill command. "Julian! Our dance!" "Ignore her," but he shook her off as if she were a gnat. He dropped to his knees beside Lena, his tuxedoed trousers scraping against the floor. His face was ashen, all traces of the awe he'd held moments before replaced by raw, unvarnished fear. His hands hovered over her, wanting to help but afraid to touch. "Lena, look at me! Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" he pleaded, his voice low and frantic. He was oblivious to the hundreds of eyes upon them, to his new wife, fuming just feet away. His entire world had narrowed to the terrified woman on the floor. It was then that Marco emerged from the periphery of the crowd. The gentle chef's face was set in a grim, determined line. He held his smartphone aloft like a torch, his knuckles white where he gripped it. He didn't look at Isabella. He addressed the room, his voice booming through the sudden quiet with an authority no one knew he possessed. "I think everyone should hear this," he announced, his voice trembling not with fear but with righteous anger. "I think you all deserve to know what kind of performance was really planned for tonight." A crystal-clear audio recording filled the grand hall. Isabella's voice, unmistakably hers, laced with cruel laughter. "She actually believed me? Oh my God, the stupidity. Just wait until she gets up there. She's going to croak like the fat, pregnant frog she is. The band doesn't have the music. It's going to be a glorious train wreck. But what if she's actually good? Please. She's a nobody. A breeding cow who mops floors. This will put her right back in her place. Permanently. It'll be the most entertaining part of this boring, expensive circus." The silence that followed was absolute, profound and heavier than any sound. Every head turned slowly toward the bride, who stood frozen on the stage, her beautiful features arranged in an expression of stunned disbelief. The truth, captured in her own vile words, hung in the air, stripping her of every pretense, every shred of dignity. Julian rose to his feet. The movement was slow, deliberate. He turned to face his wife, and the look on his face was one of cold, horrifying clarity. It was the look of a man who had been blind and could now see the monster standing before him with terrible precision. The fatigue, the doubt, the quiet sadness that had plagued him for months were gone, burned away by the white-hot truth. "Is this true?" he asked. His voice was dangerously quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the dead-silent ballroom. Isabella's mouth opened and closed. She started to stammer, to fabricate, her eyes wide with panic. "Julian, darling, it's not what it was a joke, just a private joke. They edited it." He simply held up a hand, a gesture so final it was more devastating than a shout. Without another word, without a single look of regret, he slowly, deliberately twisted the brand-new platinum wedding band from his finger. He held it for a moment between his thumb and forefinger, a symbol of a promise that was now the greatest lie of his life. Then he let it go. It hit the wooden stage with a soft, pathetic clink, rolling in a small, glittering circle before coming to a rest at her feet. "This marriage," he announced, his voice ringing with the absolute, unshakable finality that echoed in the hearts of every guest, "is over." Voices rose in a confused babble. Camera phones, previously discreet, were now held high, capturing the entire scandalous unraveling. Isabella stood utterly alone, the ruins of her $3 million dream collapsing around her, her face a terrifying canvas of fury and utter humiliation. Julian didn't look at her again. He turned back to Lena as the first paramedics, called by a quick-thinking guest, rushed onto the stage with a gurney. He knelt again, his hand gently covering hers. "I'm right here, Lena. I'm coming with you." He followed as they carefully lifted her, a stark figure in his wedding tuxedo, leaving his old life behind without a single backward glance. "Just wait until she tries to hit that high note," Isabella's voice sneered from the phone speaker, met with the tittering approval of her bridesmaids. "The pregnant little mouse will finally learn her place." A profound, sickened silence descended upon the ballroom, so complete that the rustle of a napkin sounded like a thunderclap. The glittering facade of the $3 million wedding had been violently shattered, revealing the ugly, petty truth festering at its core. Julian rose from his knees beside Lena, his movements slow and deliberate, as if pushing through deep water. His face was a bloodless mask, all the color drained away to leave a cold, pale clarity. He looked at Isabella, and for the first time he truly saw her, not the beautiful, polished socialite he thought he was marrying, but a vindictive stranger whose soul was as small and dark as a closed fist. The scales fell from his eyes with terrible precision. The fatigue, the doubt, the quiet sadness that had plagued him for months were gone, burned away by the white-hot truth. "Is this true?" he asked. His voice was dangerously quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the dead-silent ballroom. Isabella's mouth opened and closed. She started to stammer, to fabricate, her eyes wide with panic. "Julian, darling, it's not what it was a joke, just a private joke. They edited it." He simply held up a hand, a gesture so final it was more devastating than a shout. Without another word, without a single look of regret, he slowly, deliberately twisted the brand-new platinum wedding band from his finger. He held it for a moment between his thumb and forefinger, a symbol of a promise that was now the greatest lie of his life. Then he let it go. It hit the wooden stage with a soft, pathetic clink, rolling in a small, glittering circle before coming to a rest at her feet. "This marriage," he announced, his voice ringing with an absolute, unshakable finality that echoed in the hearts of every guest, "is over." The spell of silence broke into a cacophony of gasps, excited whispers, and the frantic clicks of camera phones now held aloft without shame, capturing every second of the spectacular social collapse. Isabella stood utterly alone at the center of the storm, the ruins of her $3 million dream collapsing around her, her face a terrifying canvas of incandescent fury and utter naked humiliation. Julian didn't look at her again. His entire world had narrowed to the woman on the floor. He turned back as the paramedics, called by a quick-thinking guest, rushed onto the stage with a gurney. He helped them gently lift Lena, his hand never leaving her shoulder, a stark and steadfast figure in his ruined wedding tuxedo. "I'm right here, Lena. I'm coming with you," he said, his voice firm, a promise. He followed the gurney as it was wheeled out through the parted crowd, past the staring eyes and dropped jaws, leaving his old life behind without a single backward glance. The ambulance ride was a blur of sterile light and hushed professional urgency. Julian sat on a small jump seat, his hand still wrapped around Lena's, his thumb absently stroking her knuckles. He watched the paramedic work, checking her vitals, murmuring assurances that the baby's heartbeat was strong. Lena's eyes were wide, tears tracking through the makeup she'd worn for the performance. She was trembling, a combination of shock, pain, and the seismic aftershock of public mortification. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I ruined your wedding." "No, you didn't ruin anything. You ended a farce. You were the only real true thing in that entire room." His grip on her hand tightened. "The only thing that got ruined tonight was my exceptionally poor judgment." He spoke to the admitting nurses with a calm authority that ensured she was seen immediately. He stood outside the curtained bay while the doctor examined her, his arms crossed, staring blankly at a poster about hand hygiene without seeing it. His mind replayed the last hour on a loop. Lena's voice soaring, the ugly shock of her fall, the damning recording, the weight of his ring leaving his finger. He felt no regret, only a vast hollow relief, as if he had narrowly avoided stepping off a cliff he hadn't even seen. When the doctor finally pulled back the curtain, his expression was kind. "Bruised ribs, a sprained wrist, and a great deal of shock," he reported. "But the baby is perfect. Strong heartbeat, active. They're both going to be just fine." He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding his breath. He stepped back to Lena's bedside. She was propped up on pillows, her face ashen but peaceful, one hand resting on the swell of her belly where the monitor still recorded a steady, rhythmic beat. The sound filled the quiet room, a tiny, powerful drumbeat of life and resilience. "I am so sorry, Lena," Julian said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I never should have brought someone like that into our lives. I never should have put you in that position." "I should have," he insisted, his guilt a sharp personal thing. "But I promise you this, you will never be invisible again. And you will never have to worry about a home or a job. Not ever again." The first grainy videos of Lena's performance, uploaded by a guest, were racking up millions of views. The hashtag on Shattered Glass was trending. News outlets, always hungry for a society scandal with a Cinderella twist, were scrambling to piece the story together. The tale of the pregnant maid with the angel's voice who brought a tech millionaire's wedding to a scandalous halt was going viral, and by sunrise, Lena Petrova would be anonymous no more. It was a tiny, galloping horse of a heartbeat, a promise that the life inside her had weathered the storm. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, had confirmed it. Bruised ribs, a sprained wrist, and a great deal of shock. But both mother and baby were ultimately unharmed. The wave of relief that washed over Lena was so potent it left her trembling, tears silently tracking paths through the dust and dried champagne still on her cheeks. Julian, a stark figure in his rumpled wedding tuxedo, sat vigil in the stiff plastic chair pulled up to her bedside. The pristine white bow tie was undone and hung limply around his neck, a symbol of the entire day's unraveling. His face was etched with a guilt so profound it seemed to age him. The gilded tan he'd acquired on a pre-wedding trip to St. Bart's looked out of place against the pallor of his shock. "I am so sorry, Lena," he said, the words a broken record he seemed powerless to stop. "I never should have put you in that position. I never should have brought someone like that into our lives." His voice was raw, stripped of its usual CEO composure. Lena turned her head on the pillow to look at him. The harsh fluorescent lights highlighted the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "You didn't know," she murmured, her own voice raspy from singing, from crying, from the shock of the fall. "I should have," he insisted, the words a sharp, personal indictment. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, utterly destroying it. There were signs, so many signs. The way she treated the staff, the condescension she showed my mother. I chose to ignore it because it was easier than admitting I was making a catastrophic mistake. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing in hushed, earnest tones between checks from the night nurse. He confessed he'd been harboring doubts for months, a cold knot of dread in his stomach that he'd silenced with logistics and wedding planning. He told her about the prenuptial agreement, the coldness of it, which should have been his first clue that he was entering a merger, not a marriage. "And then you," he said, his gaze lifting to meet hers. "You stood there in front of all those people who were meant to be my friends and family, and you were so exposed. But you weren't broken. You were magnificent. Your strength, your dignity, it was the most clarifying moment of my life." It was like someone finally turned on the lights. She told him things too, small fragments of her life before the mansion. She spoke of Austin, of open mic nights and the dream that had slowly been suffocated by waitressing shifts and overdue bills. She mentioned Leo only in passing, a shadow that had briefly darkened her door before disappearing. Julian listened with an intensity she'd never experienced from anyone, his focus entirely on her words. As the darkest hours of the night began to soften into the pre-dawn grey, he made his promises. They weren't the vague assurances of a guilty boss. They were specific, concrete plans. "You will never be invisible again," he vowed, "and you will never have to worry about a home or a job. Not ever again. The main house, I can't even think about going back there right now. But the guest house, the one tucked away by the old oak grove, it's yours. It's quiet, it's private, and it's a place for you to rest and recover, for as long as you need. Please, let me do this. It's the very least I can do." He paused, and a new, different kind of intensity lit his eyes. "And that song, Lena, Shattered Glass," he said the title with a reverence that made her breath catch. "That song needs to be heard by the world. It's not just a song, it's a declaration. What Isabella meant for humiliation, you turned into art. Real, powerful, breathtaking art. I have connections in the industry. Producers, studio engineers, publicists. Let me help you. Not as a charity case," he added quickly, seeing the hesitation on her face, "but as someone who believes unequivocally in raw talent. Your voice, it deserves to be heard." The first grainy videos from wedding guests were ricocheting across the internet. The hashtag #YourShatteredGlass was trending globally, and news outlets were scrambling to find any information on the mysterious maid with the voice of an angel. But inside room 407, There was only the rhythmic proof of a baby's heartbeat, the profound exhaustion of survival, and the tentative, fragile beginning of something entirely new. Instead of the service entrance at the back of the colossal main house, Julian turned down a narrow, tree-lined drive that wound through a grove of ancient, sprawling oak trees. At the end of the path, nestled in a sun-drenched clearing, was a charming cottage-style guest house. Its whitewashed walls were half covered in ivy, and a small, welcoming porch held 2 rocking chairs. It looked like a place from a storybook, a world away from the sterile marble opulence of the mansion and the cramped utilitarian staff quarters she had called home. Julian carried her single worn duffel bag to the door, handing her the key. "It's all yours. No one will bother." Handing her the key. "It's all yours. No one will bother you here. The Wi-Fi password is on the fridge, and Marco—" He paused, a faint, grateful smile touching his lips. "Marco has already been by." The main room was bright and airy, with large windows looking out onto a private garden. The air smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers. On the small kitchen table was a basket overflowing with gourmet teas, crackers, and ginger candies. The refrigerator, as Julian had hinted, was fully stocked, not with lavish delicacies, but with wholesome, easy-to-prepare meals, each container labeled in Marco's familiar, looping handwriting. On the couch was a large box, and atop it sat a note on elegant stationery. "For the little one, and for you. Welcome home, Eleanor." Inside, Lena found impossibly soft organic cotton onesies, hand-knit booties, a stack of cloth diapers, and a plush, velvet-lined bassinet. A sob caught in her throat. It wasn't just the generosity, it was the profound, thoughtful kindness. They had seen her, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be cared for. This was a haven. She slept for 12 hours straight in the blessedly quiet cottage, the only sounds the rustling of leaves outside her window. The next morning, she was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching a hummingbird dance around a feeder when Julian arrived. He wasn't in a suit, but in dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, looking more like the tech visionary he was and less like the grieving groom of yesterday. He didn't come empty-handed. He carried a leather portfolio and 2 cups of coffee from her favorite local shop, a detail that did not escape her notice. He sat in the adjacent rocking chair, and for a few minutes they just rocked in a comfortable silence, listening to the morning. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Like I haven't slept in years," she admitted. He nodded, then took a breath, his demeanor shifting into something more focused. "Lena, I want to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." He opened the portfolio on his lap. "This isn't charity. What I'm about to propose is a business investment." It was a formal proposal for the founding of a limited liability company, LP Records. It outlined his role as a silent financial partner, providing seed capital for the professional recording, production, marketing, and distribution of a single shattered glass. It detailed the division of royalties, the recoupment schedule for his initial investment, and the ownership of the master recording. It was meticulous, professional, and utterly staggering. "I believe in your talent," he said, his voice low and earnest. "What you did on that stage, that was more than just a beautiful voice. That was artistry. That's a marketable, powerful commodity. This," he tapped the paper, "is me investing in that commodity. It's a business proposition. We'll both profit if it succeeds." Just 48 hours ago, she had been scrubbing his toilets, her biggest dream, a hope that her child wouldn't inherit her life of quiet servitude. Now a millionaire was presenting her with a contract for a music career. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is too much. I can't accept this." Eleanor Croft walked toward them, a gentle smile on her face. Marco was a few steps behind her, holding a fresh loaf of bread wrapped in a checkered cloth. "You must, dear," Eleanor continued. "That song is a gift, not just to you, but to anyone who needs to hear it. Let Julian use his resources for something good for a change." "He's right, Kara. It's not a handout. It's a hand-up. You have a talent I've only ever seen in legends. This is your shot. You take it, for you and for that baby." He placed the bread in her hands. "Now eat. You need your strength." He believed in her. They all did. The weight of their belief was terrifying. But beneath the fear was an ember of the girl from Austin, the one who used to sing in smoky bars and dream of a recording studio. That ember began to glow, cutting through the haze of shock and humility. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of pain or exhaustion. They were tears of overwhelming, terrifying, glorious hope. She looked down at the contract, then back at Julian. "Okay," she said, her voice a little stronger. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Okay, let's do it." A genuine, relieved smile broke across his face. He produced a pen from his portfolio. With a hand that only shook a little, Lena Petrova took it and signed her name on the line, marking not an end, but the true, official beginning of everything. Julian was true to his word. Within days of her signing the contract, he arranged a meeting with Marcus Thorne, a legendary music producer known for his Midas touch with raw, authentic talent. Marcus, a man with kind eyes and a sharp, discerning ear, arrived at the guest house with a casual demeanor that immediately put Lena at ease. He listened to the raw, shaky phone recording of her wedding performance, his expression unreadable. When the last note faded, he was silent for a long moment before simply stating, "We have work to do." That voice is a national treasure buried in a backyard. Let's go dig it up. Her pregnancy advanced, a constant grounding reminder of why she was doing this. The songs flowed more freely than she had ever imagined, pouring out of a place of pain, hope, and newfound safety. Julian was a constant, supportive presence, but never an intrusive one. He'd stop by in the evenings, often with takeout from a restaurant Marco was curious about, and they would talk about music, business, and everything except the wedding. He listened to her demos with a focus that made her feel seen not as a project, but as an artist. A few weeks later, on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning, her water broke. The chaotic joy of new motherhood was a whirlwind of blinding hospital lights and overwhelming emotion. Through it all, Julian was there, not as a boss, but as a steadfast friend, holding her hand during the worst of the contractions and making frantic calls to ensure the best obstetrician was on duty. When she finally held her daughter, a beautiful, healthy girl with a shock of dark hair and wise dark eyes, she named her Sophia for the wisdom she hoped her daughter would possess. Julian was the first person besides the medical staff to hold her, his large, capable hands cradling the tiny infant with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to Lena's eyes. Recovery with a newborn was a haze of sleepless nights and breathtaking love, but the momentum of her career did not stall. Julian and Marcus handled the business, building a palpable buzz. Shortly after she and Sophia were settled back into the guest house, Shattered Glass was officially released. The single, propelled by the incredible backstory and the raw, soul-stirring power of Lena's voice, became an overnight sensation. It was more than a song, it was a narrative. News outlets clamored to tell the Cinderella story of the pregnant maid with the golden voice who had brought a millionaire's wedding to a screeching halt. The video of her performance, leaked from a guest's phone, went viral, amassing millions of views. Radio stations across the country picked it up, the haunting melody pouring out of cars, kitchens, and offices. Lena's life became a surreal carousel of interviews conducted from her living room with a sleeping Sophia in a bassinet beside her. She learned to tell her story without flinching, to talk about the humiliation without being defined by it. The world wasn't just listening to her music, they were listening to her. In a matter of months, Lena Petrova went from anonymous servitude to a name on everyone's lips. With the first wave of royalties, a sum so large it made her bank manager stutter, Lena made her first independent decision as this new version of herself. She bought a small, cozy house not far from Julian's estate. It was hers. The deed had only her name on it. She painted the nursery a soft, sunshine yellow and hung a swing on the porch, creating a warm, stable home for herself and her daughter, a world away from the staff quarters and the opulent cruelty of the main mansion. She began work on a full album, her creativity flourishing in the peace and autonomy of her own space. The songs were deeper now, exploring themes of motherhood, resilience, and cautious new love. Throughout it all, Julian remained her biggest supporter and most trusted confidant. Their professional relationship, built on contracts and business proposals, slowly, cautiously blossomed into a deep and abiding friendship. He was a constant in Sophia's life, showing up for weekend afternoons, not with extravagant gifts, but with his time, reading children's books with funny voices and walking with the stroller for hours so Lena could grab a precious few moments of sleep. He was the gentle, loving presence she had never had for herself, and she watched, her heart full, as he became a foundational part of her daughter's world. She was in the backyard, watching Julian push a giggling Sophia in the infant swing he'd installed, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. The voice on the other end was a ghost, a smooth, familiar baritone that instantly turned her blood to ice. "Lena, baby, it's me, Leo." In the backyard, Julian was gently pushing a giggling Sophia in the swing he'd installed, his laughter mingling with the baby's delighted shrieks. This was her reality now, a small, cozy house painted a soft sunshine yellow, the scent of jasmine on the evening air, and a profound, hard-won peace. The royalties from Shattered Glass had not just bought her freedom. They had purchased this sanctuary, a home with only her name on the deed, a world away from the staff quarters and the opulent cruelty of the Sterling Croft mansion. Her creativity, once a secret hummed into dust motes, now flourished in the quiet autonomy of her own space. Songs poured out of her, deeper and more complex than anything she'd written before. They were ballads of motherhood that spoke of fierce, terrifying love, and upbeat anthems of resilience that made her producer, Marcus Thorne, nod with excited approval. A full album was taking shape, a testament to her journey from shattered glass to something whole and beautiful. And through it all, there was Julian. The formal business proposal had long since been fulfilled, their professional relationship evolving into something far more meaningful. He was her most trusted confidant, her biggest supporter, the steady presence who showed up not with extravagant gifts, but with his time. He read children's books to Sophia with ridiculous voices, walked with the stroller for hours to give Lena a moment of quiet, and had become a foundational, gentle part of her daughter's world. Lena watched them now, her heart so full it ached, allowing herself to acknowledge the fragile, hopeful feeling that had been growing for weeks, a feeling that looked a lot like love. Her phone, resting on the step beside her, buzzed, shattering the perfect moment. An unknown number glowed on the screen. A prickle of unease, a ghost of her old anxiety traveled up her spine. She almost let it go to voicemail, but some stubborn habit made her answer. "Hello? Lena? Baby, it's me, Leo." The sound of Sophia's laughter, Julian's calm presence, the scent of jasmine, it all receded, replaced by the memory of a dusty Austin road and the sight of taillights disappearing after she'd whispered the words, "I'm pregnant." The crushing silence that had followed, the months of terrified uncertainty. Her throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "I saw you on the news," Leo continued, his voice dripping a practiced, syrupy charm that once might have fooled her. "Your song, God, Lena, it's incredible. I always knew you had it in you." He paused, letting the false compliment hang in the air. "Look, I know I messed up. I was scared, I was stupid. But seeing you, seeing our little girl, it's cleared my head. I want to be in her life. I want to be a father to Sophia." Rage, hot and blinding, erupted through the ice in her veins. "You have no right," she choked out, her voice a raw whisper. "You lost any right the second you drove away. I'm her father. That's a biological fact. You can't change that. I just want to do the right thing now." He didn't want to be a father. He wanted a piece of her success. He'd seen the house, the fame, the money, and he'd come circling back like a vulture. Lena's hand trembled so violently the phone nearly slipped from her grasp. The old fears rushed back. The fear of being alone, of not being enough, of having everything ripped away. She was that scared maid in the hallway again, trying to make herself small and invisible. "Stay away from us," she managed, her voice gaining a shred of strength. "I don't think that's going to work for me." Leo said, his tone finally dropping the pretense. "We need to talk, in person. We can do this the easy way, or we can get lawyers involved. Your choice." Lena sat frozen, the phone pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone as if it were a death knell. The beautiful, peaceful evening had curdled. The past hadn't just called, it had kicked the door down. She didn't realize she was crying until a warm tear splashed onto her hand. She didn't hear Julian's approach until his shadow fell over her, blocking the setting sun. "Lena?" His voice was soft, laced with immediate concern. He took one look at her pale, tear-streaked face, and the phone clutched in her white-knuckled hand and knelt before her. "What happened? What's wrong?" She shook her head, helpless. Julian's eyes hardened. He didn't need her to say it. The context was all there. He gently pried the phone from her hand and saw the unknown number on the screen. "Was it him?" he asked, his voice low and dangerously calm. All she could do was nod. In an instant, his entire demeanor shifted from gentle friend to formidable protector. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "Listen to me," he said, his gaze locking with hers, fierce and unwavering. "You are not that woman anymore. You are not alone. He does not get to do this to you. Not again. I'm calling my attorney right now. We'll get a restraining order. We'll have him served before he even knows what's happening." He began to pace the length of the porch, the tech mogul fully present, commanding and decisive. "He has no claim here. He abandoned you. He has no legal standing if he's just after money, which he obviously is. He was a fortress." He finished his brief, terse call and came back to her, crouching down again. "It's handled. For now. You are safe. Sophia is safe." He looked toward the swing, where Sophia was contentedly chewing on a stuffed rabbit. "I meant what I said, Lena. The full force of my resources, my legal team, everything I have, it's yours. He will not shatter your world again. I won't let him." It was met by a surge of gratitude and a dawning, solid strength. Leo had tried to break her once and had nearly succeeded. But now she had an army of one, a man who had already chosen her side long before this battle had begun. This time the past didn't stand a chance.